Now that you've traced a few of these patterns and you have a few to experiment with, it's time to start making them in thread to see what they really look like. I like to create these little swatches or patches. So I make them rectangular in shape and I try different stitches, and then I save them in a little cellophane pocket with a piece of black construction paper behind. And then on the back of the pocket, I keep the pricking and any notes that I've taken, such as the thread that I used, the pricking size, the stitches that I used for each pinpoint, and also any comments I have about how easy it was to work, how the tensioning went, and if I've ever used it in a project. So let's see how to create one of these rectangular patterns in order to create our swatches. The first step is to make sure we have a rectangular tracing of our pattern. If you've been using the spreadsheet layout, like this one, which has rows and columns, then you already have a rectangle and there's nothing more to do at this step. But if you've been indenting your columns or indenting your rows, then you're going to have to do something to square these things up. So let's see how that works. Indenting the columns is pretty straightforward. So what we want to do is have our pins across the top go out all the way to the right, and the pins across the right should be straight. And so we have this sort of staircase area to fill in. And similarly on the bottom left, we want to fill in, so we have a vertical column of pins and a horizontal row of pins. So we have this staircase area to fill in down here. So let's look at how to do that. I've taken my template and colored the pins by row just so that it's easier for me to talk about them. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of pins in this particular pattern. And I'm going to fill in the hole up here. So I look at my column and I take my template and line it up with that column. So the bottom of the template lines up with the top pins in the column that I've already traced. And then what I do is I just mark the pins for each row until I get to the row which is the top of my rectangle, and then I stop. So here I've marked 3 rows of pins. Notice that there are actually 5 rows of pins in my template, but I don't need the top 2. I didn't need the pink and green because I've already reached the top of my rectangle. And after I've marked the pins in, I just draw the lines in to complete my diagram. Similarly in the bottom, I line the top of my template up with the bottom of what I've traced so far, and I just mark in my rows of pins until I get to the bottom of the rectangle, and then mark in my pairs. And I keep doing that until I have my horizontal line on the top and bottom of pins and my vertical line on the left and right hand side. Now in your pattern, if you've been moving your pins around, maybe some of these pins won't line up exactly vertically. They might be a little bit above that line. That's fine as long as they don't go all the way to the next row of pins, which you can easily judge by the distance between your rows. So it could be a little bit above or a little bit below this horizontal line. That's fine as long as you keep going until you're as close to that horizontal line as you can get. And same in the bottom. When we're indenting rows, we have the same problem. We want to have a vertical line and a horizontal line of pins. So we have this staircase shape on the bottom left and the staircase shape on the top right to fill in. This is going to be a little trickier than the indented columns because we're going to be putting in partial copies of our pattern in the horizontal direction. That might sound a bit intimidating, but don't worry, I have a trick to make it easy for you. So here's my template, and what I'm going to do is color it in according to the pairs that are required. And I call these kissing paths. They kiss each other, but they don't cross. So let me explain how this works. So I draw in my first pair in red, and it comes to this pin. It came in on the right-hand side, so it's going to go out on the right-hand side. So the line coming out of this pin, I'll color in red as well. On the other side, I have a yellow. Well, let's say I pick a different color, yellow, and I draw this pair in yellow. It came in on the left, so it goes out on the left. So whatever side it came in on, that's the side it comes out on. So you can see that this yellow sort of arrow and the red arrow, they kiss each other at this pin, but they don't cross over each other, they just kiss. Similarly, this pin, I have a yellow pair coming in on the right, so it's going to go out on the right. And the blue pair, which I've just picked another color here, so make that one blue, it came in on the left and it will go out on the left. So whatever side the pair came in on, it goes out on. Another way of thinking about each pin is to look at this cross, twist, twist, cross, twist pattern. So in this pattern, so I've done a cross, 2 twists, and a cross and a twist. If I color these threads, the left pair red and the right pair blue, and then trace the threads through the diagram, we see that the red threads, they interact with the blue threads, but they keep on the same side. So they come in on the left and they go out on the left. And here on the right hand side, our blue threads come in and interact here with the red threads, but they stay to their side on the way out. So they come in on the right and out on the right. So you can think about these pair colors in the same way, as if we had colored the pairs and then done this cross, twist, twist, cross, twist stitch at the pin. Okay, now that I have my color diagram, I can come and look at the places that I need to fill in. So here I have my gray pairs and I need to fill in this area. I line my template up so the right side of the template meets the left side of the row that I've traced, so the left hand side of the row. And what I'm going to do is look at the pairs that are already marked. So these are the ones that are gray in my diagram. So at this pin, I have 2 incoming gray lines. I need 2 outgoing lines. I already have 1 outgoing in gray. I need another one, so I'm going to trace the first pair that I see in my diagram, which is this red one. So I trace the red copy in. And now I have 2 gray and 2 pairs coming out. The red one I just traced and the gray one that was already there. That's good for that pin. So now I go to the next pin in the row. This one has 1 pair coming in gray, so it needs a pair going out. So I trace the next pair that I have in my template. So it's yellow, so I trace this yellow one. So I have 1 in and 1 out. Now, I don't have any more pins to fill in, and I don't have any more gray lines coming into that pin, so I'm done. I just needed the red pair and the yellow pair to finish that row. Similarly, on the right-hand side of that row, I line my template up so that the left part of the template aligns with the very right edge of the row. And this time on the right side, I look at the bottom. So here I have my gray pairs, and the first pair pin I look at is over here. It has 2 outgoing gray ones and only 1 incoming gray one. So I need another incoming one. So I trace the first pair that I have on the left, which is this green pair. Okay, so now I have 2 incoming, 1 gray and 1 green, and 2 outgoing. Then I go to the next pin. It has 1 gray outgoing and nothing coming in, no gray ones coming in. So I need to trace a pair for that outgoing gray one. So I trace this next pair that I have, which is the blue one. All right, and now I have 1 incoming and 1 outgoing. And I don't have any other outgoing gray pairs, so I don't have to trace any more of these paths from my template. So now I'm done on the right-hand side, and I can go up and work the next row. And again, I keep going until I filled in the whole corner so that I have a horizontal row of pins across the top and a bottom, and a vertical pins on the left and right-hand side. And again, here on the far side, one thing to notice is that the very far right pins, they all have 1 coming in and 1 going out. 1 coming in, 1 going out. So that's my left and right edge always have 1 in, 1 out, except for the very first and the very last pin. The first has 1 out and the last has 1 in. Similarly here, the first has 1 out and the last has 1 in. Lastly, when you're tracing these partial copies of your pattern, make sure that you're following your templates. So if you're using one of these patterns where you're mirror reflecting or rotating the template, so you have not just B, but D, P, and Q as well, that you orient your template correctly when you're filling in the row. So for example, if I was completing this row, which has all Qs in it, I need to make sure my template is in the Q position before filling in the partial row that goes here. And similarly in my columns, if I was filling in this part here, I have to make sure I have my template first in the B position and then in the D position to fill in the rest of this column. All right, let's see what it looks like in practice to add some more copies here, some partial copies in the indented rows. So this pattern was made from this template. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over this template and mark it in my colored paths. So what I've started is just to trace the pattern itself in pencil. Now I'm going to mark the pinpoints with my black marker. And now the important step is I'm going to color in my paths. So I'm going to use 4 different colors because there are 4 pairs here, and just trace this kissing path. So I'll start on the right hand side. So I'm going to draw that edge in red. All right, now it is coming in from the right hand side to that first pin, so it has to go out on the right hand side. Here I have only 1 pair coming in, so that same pair has to come back out. Similarly here I have 1 pair coming in, so that same pair comes out. And at this point I have a red pair coming in from the right, so it has to go back out on the right. All right, I'll draw the next pair in blue. So starting at the top, so I'll draw it here. So that's the first edge. Now it's coming in from the left, so it has to stay on the left-hand side, so this vertical line becomes blue. And here again, it's on the left, so it has to stay on the left. So this pair becomes blue. Switching to orange for the next one. So I draw the first pair here in orange. It's coming in from the right, so it has to stay on the right, so this pair becomes orange. There's only 1 coming in. What? There shouldn't be a pin. Sorry, there shouldn't be a pin there. Just go on straight. That was a mistake. And here we have it coming in on the right, so it should go out on the right. And I'll draw the last pairs in green. So we have this pairs in green. It comes in from the left, so it goes out on the left. Here we have 1 coming in, so the same one comes out. Only 1 comes in, so the same one comes out. And here we come in from the left, so we go out on the left. Okay, so that's created my kissing pairs. So let's just erase the pencil lines so we can see it in the colors more clearly. Okay, so now I'm going to use this colored template to mark the pairs that are missing on my tracing. So the first thing I do is I'm going to fill in this left-hand part of the second row. So I've lined the template up so that the 2 pairs that are on the left of the tracing line up with the pinpoints that are on the right of my template. And I tape it in place. I'm not going to mark the pins until I've traced out the pair. So here I'm going to look at this pin first. It has a pair coming in from the left and a pair from the right. And so it already has a pair coming out on the right, so it needs a pair on the left. So it's going to trace this first red path. So I can go ahead and put the pinpoints in for the red path. And now I can trace it. For clarity, I'll use a red marker so that you can remember that it was the red path. So here is my red path. Now notice this pair already is there, but it's doubling up, so I'm going to have a double pair there, like that. So that was my first pinpoint, so it has 2 coming in and 2 going out, so that's good. So now I go to my next pinpoint. It's got 1 coming in and nothing going out, so I have to trace the next path, which is my blue path. So I'm just going to mark the pinpoints for that. Just need 1 more. And now I'll trace the pair lines. So that pin now has 1 coming in and 1 going out, and that's all I need to do for that particular copy, because there are no other pairs coming in and we don't need any more pairs going out. All right, so now let me just move my tracing. And we'll finish up the left-hand side of this other row, this second row here, third row here. Position my tracing. And I can do the same thing again. So we have 2 pairs coming in and only 1 going out, so we need to trace that red copy. So I'll mark the pins and I'll trace the red copy. Again, there's a line here, but we need a second line, so I'll have a double pair. So that completes that. It has 2 in and 2 out. I go to the next pin. It has 2 in and none out, so I'm going to have to do 2 pairs traced from there. So I'll start with the blue one, and I'll make sure all the pins for the blue path are marked, and trace the blue path. Okay, so we have 2 in, 1 out, so we need to draw the second path, which is our orange path. So I'll trace the orange pins for the orange path here, and then using an orange marker, I'll just mark pairs in. Okay, so now this pin has 2 in and 2 out, and then just go to the last pin here. It has 1 in, but nothing coming out, so I'll have to trace this path. So that's the green path. So I will mark the pin marks for the green path, and then draw in the lines for those pairs. Okay, so now this one has 1 in and 1 out, and there are no other pins to the left, so I've completed that corner. So just so you can see, I've made a copy with the red, blue, orange, and green paths, these kissing paths, to fill in that last corner. And if you look closely, you can see that now I have a nice vertical line of pins. There's nothing here, and that's okay, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a pin every spot, as long as I have a nice vertical column of pins. Okay, now I'm going to go over to the other side and do this bottom corner. So this row is finished, so I go to the second row from the bottom, and I line my template up. I line the pins that are on the far right of this row in my tracing with the far left of the template. Tape it down. Okay, and on the right hand side, I'm going to go bottom up. So here is the first pin that I have to look at. It has 2 outgoing, but only 1 incoming. So we need to trace another path for the incoming. So that's going to be the green path. So I will mark the pins for the green path and trace the lines. And once again here, I already have a black line, but I need a second line for the green path. So I'll double it up. Now, if I look at that pin, I have 2 going out and 2 coming in, so I'm good. So I go to the next pin. It has 1 going out, nothing coming in, so I need to trace just 1 copy. So I'm just going to trace this orange copy. So I'll mark the pins for the orange copy. and trace the pairs. Okay. Now I've got one coming in, one going out, so I'm done. I don't have to trace the rest of this template because I have a balance of incoming pairs with outgoing pairs from the top to the bottom. So I can move my template to do the next row. So once again, I line the tracing up with my template. And I start from the first pin on the bottom, which is incomplete. So it has 2 outgoing pairs, but only 1 incoming pair. So I'm going to have to trace this green pattern from the template. So I mark the pins for that green kissing path and draw in the lines. All right, so that pin has 2 outgoing and 2 incoming, so it's complete. Then I go to this one. It has 2 outgoing and no incoming pairs. So now I have to add 2 incoming paths. So I'll start with the one on the left, which is my orange pair. So I'll mark the pins and draw in the lines. Okay, so I have 1 incoming and 2 outgoing, so I need to trace the second path. My blue pair. Oops. Trace those lines. Okay, and now if I look at it, I have 2 incoming and 2 outgoing, so that's good. Then I move on to the next pin here, and it has 1 outgoing and nothing coming in, so I have to trace this red path, this red kissing path, to give me my 1 incoming. Mark the pins, draw in the lines. All right, and now I have completed that corner because I have 1 coming in and 1 going out, and I have no more pairs to the right to worry about. So I have completed this rectangular patch by filling in those corners on the opposite corners so that they have a vertical row of pins on both sides and a horizontal row of pins on the top and the bottom. And the last step to preparing our pricking is just to put some kind of border around the outside of our rectangle. It is entirely up to you what kind of border you want to work. Ideally, it should be something that's quick and that you're familiar with. I like to put this pin after 2 border with a little bit of a cloth foot side on it. So I will show you how to draw that, but whatever you want to put as your border is fine. Before I show you how I did that pin after 2 border around the outside, first just let me remind you, back in lesson 1 where we started designing our templates, I introduced 2 options. Option 1, we had the left and right hand side of our template frame pointing towards the middle of the template. And option 2, we had the left and right hand side pointing away from the center of our template. This is significant when it comes to drawing our border. So first let us look at option 1. So here's an example of option 1. Our borders are pointing towards the inside of the frame. And what I want you to notice is all the pins across the top of our pattern, they have 2 outgoing pairs. And across the bottom, there are 2 incoming pairs to match up. And similarly, here is another option 1 pattern. So 2 outgoing across the top and 2 incoming across the bottom. This makes our life really simple because we can create our borders so that every pin across the top is providing 2 outgoing pairs for the pattern. So it's really nice when things appear in pairs of 2. And you can even maybe see that this frame has the same shape as our option 1 template. It has a square corner. If you ignore the fancy stuff going on for the cloth area, it just has a square in the corner. And so we can just drop our template directly into this frame. So you can make it as wide as you need, as long as you need, but you just drop your pattern. So here, for example, is one copy of a rose ground template, and it nicely matches up all the corner pattern. Option 2 is a little bit more complicated, but not much. So in option 2, what we notice is that on the inside, every pin has 2 outgoing pairs, but the very first pin and the very last pin, they just have 1 outgoing pair. And similarly on the bottom, the inside pins have 2 incoming pairs, but the first and last one have just 1 incoming pair. So this is a little more interesting. So our frame would like to have 2 outgoing pairs at each point, but our template only has 1. So the way we compensate for that is we just throw in a zigzag line all the way down the left side and down the right side. And this will act as the second pair. So it will just simply tie your ground to the frame. And then the dashed lines here will be replaced by your ground. So here is an example of a Paris ground. So our template kind of looks like this. Okay, does not include that one edge. So we have 1 coming in and 1 coming in from our template. And so the other outgoing pair is going to be this zigzag. Similarly on the right hand side, we have this 1 outgoing pair on the far right. It's balanced by this zigzag line, which provides the second outgoing pair just on the right hand side. Okay, so let's add a frame to this pattern. So I've traced a bunch of different copies of the pattern, made a nice large rectangle, and now I'm going to put my border around it. In the handouts, you will find this sheet, which has a trace that you can use for drawing your borders. Notice that it's got 45 degrees at the top and 60 degrees at the bottom, so make sure you use the appropriate angle. And there is a line here that shows you how long 10 centimeters should be, so you can make sure that your printout hasn't been changed inside by the printer. Okay, so in this particular pattern, I've used a 45-degree grid, so I'm going to use this pattern up here. Also notice in my tracing that it starts with a single pair. The pinpoints in the middle all have 2, but the left and right have just 1 outgoing pair in the corner. So this is an option 2 example. In the template, you will see there's a blue line on the inside. That's your zigzag line. So use this if you have option 2. If you have option 1, you can just ignore that blue line. So I'm just going to take my pattern and line it up so that the pin points match the pins in the template. And first I'm just going to trace this corner, and I will tape my tracing down. Okay, so just tracing that corner. First I will mark the pin points. And along the side, don't forget to mark the pins for the zigzag blue line. Okay, and then I will mark whatever lines I feel is necessary. So I might just mark the zigzags. And I might mark the edge pair. And it might be useful to just mark some of these border pairs at the corner. And the rest I can just follow along from the pattern. I don't need to put it right on the pricking. So that's one corner. And now I can move it over to mark a different corner. Again, I'm going to keep that zigzag line on the outside because I have an option 2 pattern here. Okay, and I have a few pinpoints left to fill in across the top, so I'm just going to line it up with a part of my frame and just fill in those extra zigzags. So for me, there were just 2 missing across the top. There may be none missing for you, or there may be more than that missing for you. Just fill in however many of those zigzags you need to connect the left and right side. All right, so there I have the top corners, and I can repeat it for the bottom corners and the sides. Along the sides of the template, we have just a long pattern for doing down the length. So you can line up the sides of your tracing with those long stretches on either side and fill in the side parts. And again, remember I'm using the blue zigzag line because I have option 1. Sorry, I have option 2 for this pattern. So here's our completed tracing with the ground in the middle and a border around it. So the next step is to scale this pattern so it's appropriate for our thread. And the way we're going to scale it is just to take a photocopier and print a copy of this pattern, but in the printing we'll give it a scaling factor so that it shrinks the pattern down. So let's look at how to scale it. We're going to use a very simple formula. So the scaling factor that we give to the printer is the preferred size. So the preferred size is the size we would like the pattern to be once it's printed out, divided by the actual size, which is the size that our tracing paper is, times 100 to give us a percentage. So let's measure out what the preferred size is. So I'm going to be using the Finca Bolillos number 40 thread. You don't have to use this thread, but I'm going to demonstrate it for this one and you can adapt it appropriately. The technique I like to use is Brenda Paternoster's Thread for Lace book. So I just look up the thread that I'm using. So it's a Finca Bolillos number 40 and it is 29 wraps per centimeter. So then I go to the little chart at the front of the book. And the pattern is on a 45-degree grid, so I'm going to look at this torsion column and look for the number 29. So it has 27 and 30, so 29 is in between there, closer to 30. And then I just scan over to the left column, so it says 4.0 and 4.5. So this is the distance between foot side pins. So the distance should be somewhere between 4 and 4.5. I'm going to choose 4.2, which is a little closer to 4. So 4.2 millimeters between foot side pins. So that is my preferred size, 4.2 millimeters. And what is my actual size? So we can take a look at the pattern and put a ruler and measure the distance between two foot side pins. So I can see that that is 1 centimeter, which is 10 millimeters. A more accurate way is to take more than just the distance between two pins, maybe do the distance between 11 pins, which will give you 10 different gaps. And so if I do a distance between 11 pins, what I get is 10 centimeters. And so then I divide that by 10 because there are 10 spacings in between, which would give me 1 centimeter, which is 10 millimeters. Another way you could measure this distance between foot side pins is to go back to your original grid that you drew your template on and just measure the distance between the top of the diamond and the bottom of the diamond. So again, that's going to be 1 centimeter or 10 millimeters. So if you're using the templates that I gave you, the 45-degree grid is a 10 millimeter foot side. So I enter 10 millimeters times 100. That's a nice easy calculation of 42%. So I take my tracing paper, put a white paper behind it, put it into the printer to print with a scaling factor of 42%. And here is the end result that I get. Notice how much smaller our printed copy is. 42% is quite a bit smaller. It's less than half the height and less than half the width. So it's a quarter of the area, less than a quarter of the area of the original template that we traced. So we get quite a small pattern, and now we can see that inaccuracies that we might have had in the placement of the pins are probably disappeared because they've been reduced so much, as well as any wobbles in the line have become insignificant. What about the scaling factor for this pattern, which is worked on a 60-degree grid? So let's have a look at that. I'll use the same calculation that I did for the 45-degree grid. So this was 45-degree grid. For the 60-degree grid, the first thing I have to look up is the preferred size. So again, looking at threads for lace, if I look in the point ground column for my 29 wraps per centimeter, it's going to be somewhere between 3.8 and 3.2 millimeters per foot side pin. So I'm going to use 3.6 millimeters, which is somewhere sort of in between 3.2 and 3.8. So that's my preferred distance between the top and bottom of the diamond. And now if I take my grid paper and measure the size of the diamond, I find that from the top of the diamond to the bottom of the diamond is 8 millimeters. So my actual size is 8 millimeters times 100. And that will give me 45%. So to scale these patterns to be appropriate for my Finca Bolillos number 40 thread, I need to scale it in my printer to be 45% of this size. Your homework for this lesson is to take your tracings and complete them as a pattern. So finish off the columns and rows with partial columns and rows if necessary, add a border to it, and then scale it to be ready as a pricking in the next lesson.